Allegra, hi.
Hi, Dave.
So we're in London, but still thinking about the Middle East. But of course, alongside the terrible events in Israel and Gaza of the last week, Saudi Arabia, the region's biggest economy, is hosting their annual conference, the Future Investment Initiative. It aims to be one of the most significant gatherings of economic finance leaders in the world in Riyadh.
It's a really important event for the region, Dave. It's often referred to as Davos in the desert, and it's a high-profile event that draws in CEOs and government leaders from across the globe. And we thought there'd be mass cancellations because of the events of the last 2 weeks, but it doesn't appear to have been the case.
No, the lineup is looking as stellar as it has done in the past. I mean, 5 years ago, the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman talked about a new era dawning for the Middle East.
إنه أوروبا الجديدة هي الشرق الأوسط. سوف تكون النهضة القادمة في العالم 30 سنة القادمة.
There he is speaking at the FII, the Future Investment Initiative, in 2018. He said that the new Europe will be the Middle East, and the next global renaissance in the next 30 years will be in that region. But of course, the events of the last few weeks have reminded the world of the instability in that part of the world, and the way that instability can spill out both for economies and for politics all around the globe.
Yep, and it's complicating the man we have all nicknamed MBS. It's complicating his efforts to focus the region on economic development rather than old feuds.
Welcome to In the City, Bloomberg's podcast connecting you to the conversations and the stories shaping the world of finance. I'm David Merritt in London with Allegra Stratton, and on the ground in Riyadh is our co-host Francine Lacqua and Riyadh Bureau Chief Matthew Martin. This week, we examine how the Saudi prince's vision for a new Middle East could be overshadowed by the escalating conflict between Israel and Hamas. Here is some of the conversation they've been having sitting right in the middle of the conference in Riyadh.
You wrote a very nice piece actually explaining why it's very complicated. First of all, to make sure that this is a success for the Crown Prince, that especially Wall Street came to this event, but also the fact that things are not normalizing with other countries in the region just complicate the efforts of MBS.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think, what we've seen over this is the seventh year they've had this investment forum here. And over the course of that time, one of the big things that MBS has tried to do is he's tried to lower the temperature in the region. He started disputes with Qatar, which he then quickly tried to resolve because he saw that this wasn't going the way that he wanted them to. He's resolved the tensions with Iran as well. There was the invasion of Yemen, which he started and quickly realized wasn't going well. He's trying to resolve that situation. And it's all part of this strategy of lower the temperature and get the focus to be on his primary goal, which is economic growth and economic diversification, with a view that the more prosperous Saudi Arabia and the region becomes, then these political feuds will melt into the distance. I mean, I think really what we've seen over the last couple of weeks with the renewed fighting in Israel, or the war with Hamas, is that, this dream of putting prosperity ahead of political rights is a very difficult one to achieve. And there's still some deep fissures in the region, which means that trying to focus on prosperity ahead of people who have legitimate claims for political rights is going to be a very, very difficult challenge to try and get to.
So Matthew, talk to me a little bit about this conference. I don't know whether it's really symptomatic of how stability in the region goes. So if there's not much stability, actually, the big players don't come. If it feels like the region is dynamic and actually has quite a lot of money to spend, then they all show up.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think if I cast my mind back, and I think you were here as well in 2017 for the first one of these, the Crown Prince wandered around the corridors afterwards. There was everybody gathering around him, taking photos of him. He was sort of greeted like this rock star almost, He had this very reformist reputation. He was taking the country and the region on and moving it forward. Since then, of course, we've had the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, when Saudi Arabia was abandoned by all of the CEOs of the big Western finance companies. We've had the relations with the US hitting a particularly low ebb under the Biden administration. I think, now we're probably sort of back towards that sort of mood that we had in 2017. The Saudi, after last year's high oil prices, Saudi Arabia is flush with petrodollars. It's got a lot of money to spend. It's got a lot of things it wants to spend it on, both internationally and domestically. So I think, the mood here is very, very positive. And as much as there is a lot of security concerns around the region, I think one of the things you hear from talking to people here, and some of the people who are flying in, is they're saying, in Riyadh, we feel safer on the streets than we do in New York or London. It's just the broader region which has got these geopolitical fissures which are not being resolved.
The Wall Street titans did show up. There's Jane Fraser of Citigroup, Jenny Johnson of Templeton. There's David Solomon of Goldman Sachs, David Rubenstein, Jamie Dimon. The list goes on. Larry Fink of BlackRock. What are they here? Are they here to ask for funding, or are they here to actually invest in the country?
I think that's the big tension that you get here. And I think in the beginning, it was very much Saudi Arabia and the Sovereign Wealth Fund, the PIF, calling friends and family and saying, you've got billions of dollars of our money which you manage abroad. We want you to come and turn up our investment conference. It also has started to attract in all of these other foreign startups, the venture capitalists. There is a lot of people are here because they want to suck money out of the country, and that is their goal. The Saudis are having a tough time turning that around because they want this conference to do two things. First of all, they want it to put them on a global map and for people to talk about them in the same sort of way they talk about events in Davos or Milken and those sorts of things. But also they want to get people to come here and see what's going on and put money into the country and put money into this diversification agenda. And so far, that's been the real struggle. There's been a lot of money that's gone out. There hasn't been a huge amount of money that's come into the country so far.
It was pretty incredible, actually, on Monday. The day before the FII started, there were like 3 conferences going on at the same time. It was pretty confusing. I mean, they were focusing on gaming, they were focusing on football, on sports. If there's 2 things that they want to make, a priority of, what is it? Tourism in the kingdom, or is it sports?
I think there's dozens of things. It's too difficult to narrow it down. I think the thing the piece which is sort of going to move the needle, I think, is going to be tourism, because the kingdom has gone from, just a few years ago, it was almost impossible to get to as a foreign leisure traveller. Now they're open up. With each passing month, it's easier and easier for foreign visitors to come here. They've set these huge targets of getting, I think there are a number I remember is 70 million foreign visitors by 2030. So that's going to put it right at the top leagues of some of the most visited countries in the world. So there's a long way to go for that. If you achieve that, that brings in lots and lots of foreign capital into the country. It creates lots and lots of jobs in the service industry. So that's a big one that they want to do. There's also, I suppose, a couple of other really strategic things they want to do is they want to shift this perception of them as being an oil exporter. And they want to say that, no, we're not an oil exporter, we're an energy exporter. We're going to make hydrogen here, we're going to ship it abroad. We're going to build solar projects, we're going to build wind farms, we're going to build hydrogen projects, and we're going to link up the grids all around the region and into Europe through this vast infrastructure scheme that Biden and the Saudis and the UAE announced between India, the Middle East and Europe. So connecting all of these places together for all of the energy that can be made in Saudi Arabia to be exported all around them. That's the dream. But getting there is, it's not a very easy thing to get to. And there's a long, long way to go as yet.
I'm surprised that actually, even if you're in the corridors of the FII, there's no real talk about the conflict and the war between Israel and Hamas. Is that because people are uneasy talking about it, or they just don't know what happens next?
There is elements of both of those, but certainly the particularly the US and the Western contingent, where there's probably a bit more sympathy for the Israeli point of view and the Israeli position. So they are, I think you can see this from some of the debates on stage when they ask direct questions about it. I think they don't quite know how to address it, and I'm sure we've seen that in the corporate earnings calls and announcements that have come out, is that nobody quite knows what to say about this situation. And so they've tried to tread very, very delicately around it. But certainly, I think on the sidelines, when you're having more informal conversations with people, it's clearly the biggest theme around right now.
Is normalization off the table, or is it frozen? This was the normalization between, for example, the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Israel.
Yeah, well, I think, earlier on today, we had Jamie Dimon say on the stage, he was pleading with the Saudis to keep this process going. and saying that, this needs to, if Saudi Arabia needs to push this because this needs to happen for the region. I think at the moment, if you look at some of the surveys of Saudi youth, 98% of the population were against normalization. That was even before the events of the past couple of weeks. So domestically, politically, it's quite a tough sell right now. But I think there is also a recognition that you don't, you need to resolve this conflict. And that's not going to happen by continuing to ignore each other and not establish diplomatic relations.
Does Saudi Arabia actually have a role? But we hear that Qatar's trying to play a mediating role. What's the role of Saudi Arabia?
Saudi's in a difficult position because, as we were just saying, it doesn't have a diplomatic relationship with Israel. So it can't talk to them. It can't apply any diplomatic pressure to them. It has no relationship there. It also, it's no big fan of Hamas either. So it can't talk to them. It can't weigh on them. Whereas Qatar hosts Hamas. It has some of the leadership and the spokesman there. It has that diplomatic relationship it can call on. So Saudi Arabia's in a tougher spot. The Saudis are very proud of this role they have as the custodian of the two most holy sites within Islam. So it has this sort of diplomatic weight within Islam that it can use, but it doesn't at the moment have those direct relationships with the main protagonists in this fight to be able to affect change. So what we're going to see more of, I think, is the Saudis and some of the other regional powers talking to the US about how to take this situation forward, how to try and come to some sort of stabilization and limit fighting from going completely out of control.
I think that this conference actually compares to Davos. I know that it's called Davos in the desert. It's come a long way in terms of how it looks, how it feels. I guess there's still, many years of experience in Davos in terms of bilaterals, having more access to meeting rooms that would make a difference. But I'm curious into what you think.
I think I would say, as a flippant remark to begin with, that I think Davos is far better organised than this is. We're 7 years in, and it still feels like this is almost the first time that they've done this. But I think,
yes. Davos.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think, look, the convening power that they have managed to pull off in a pretty short period of time is quite remarkable. They have attracted all of these people here. And I think they consider this to be more of an investment conference rather than, I think Davos has a much more of a sort of a geopolitical flavour to it. So I think that's where possibly some of the distinction goes. But, increasingly we're seeing more heads of state turning up here, particularly because, to allude back to some of our earlier conversation, some of the heads of states are coming here because they also want Saudi money as well, and they want to see Saudi Arabia play a role. So the geopolitical conversation here is rising up the agenda a little bit, I think.
Matthew Martin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So, Allegra, wish you were there in Riyadh?
Well, it's certainly hotter than a typical Davos, but it's extraordinary, isn't it, to hear them saying that there's no real talk about what's happening in Israel and Gaza.
Yeah.
I think Fran that said there's no real talk in any of the corridors about the conflict.
Yeah, and this event, which is trying to position Saudi Arabia as a regional and global player, no one being able to really address the biggest question that not only the region is facing, but the world is at the moment, is how to resolve the conflict that has erupted in Israel and Gaza.
Yeah, at some point though, they will, the role of the Saudis as very deep pocketed is going to come back to the fore. Not just right now, we're in this period where it's about the role that the Saudis can play in the diplomacy and trying to get time. But eventually, it feels a very long way off, but eventually they are going to be turned to for help with what you do, how you support Gaza and reconstruct it. It feels like very far away, but fundamentally, those conversations that world leaders are having when they're saying to the Egyptians, can you please let Palestinians in, and so on and so forth, and the Egyptians are not wanting to. Eventually, soon, there's going to have to be a question about what happens to Gaza. It doesn't feel like the most urgent question now, but it is going to be something that the Saudis, as the extremely wealthy players in the region, will need to play a part in.
Right, and it's those deep pockets, I suppose, that explain the convening power that Matthew was talking about. People are showing up, right? There was a question a week ago, like, are people actually going to cancel?
And in the end, it was,
we're seeing them all lined up,
hands,
right?
About 10 or 12, wasn't it? And there's still 200 who went. Well, I thought it was really interesting how this tension between, and Matthew was talking about people are going and they want to suck money out of the country, but actually the Saudis want to bring money and investment
into in this kind of in all these
Saudi
new industries.
Arabia. And I think that is a tension. I mean, certainly when you think about the United Kingdom is very much in the market for investment of Saudi Arabian investment in all sorts of industries, including not least green industries. I suspect, the British carbon capture and storage at some point might be of interest to the Saudis. So it is interesting, that tension between people turning up to Davos in the desert and saying, but what's their agenda? Their agenda is probably how much can we get them to invest in countries back home, rather than necessarily can we support the Saudis to create a tourism industry, for instance. And I thought also is interesting, the Jamie Dimon pleading with the Saudis on the stage there to keep going with normalization. And it seemed from Matthew, that sense that actually, I mean, what I would love to know is if it's paused, which it very much does seem to be right now, that normalization with Israel that the world had been hoping for 3 weeks ago, really very, very little time ago. If it's paused, how long are we talking? Are we talking months? Are we talking years? And if it's completely off the table, I mean, it's fascinating to hear the 98% of the population Saudi population are against normalization.
And some people have suggested that one of the aims of Hamas's attack was to scupper the chance of normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And in that sense, it's achieved its aim, clearly, at least for the time being.
But for the Saudis, if they are to create this sense, I mean, there was that quote, wasn't there? In Riyadh, people, I think people said to Matthew, in Riyadh, we feel safer than in New York or London. You know both cities well, Dave, but not in the region more widely. And I think that is the fundamental question they will have to answer sometime soon is, can you create this Saudi Arabia, which is a tourist heaven and place where lots of international travelers want to go? There's extraordinary numbers about their ambitions for tourism into Saudi Arabia, how many people they want to visit every year.
One of the world's top tourist destinations. But it seems...
Is that feasible? Is that feasible when you have not far away such deep and huge violence? Is that feasible? Potentially they will right now be trying to figure out the extent to which the two can coexist. And if the feeling is that actually it is denting their ambitions to make it, this huge tourism and also life sciences and tech of the future economy pivoting away from oil, then they will then have to help to get Palestine and the Gazans back on their feet. That's why it becomes, I think, that all of it is linked.
Right, because
the
Saudi vision of the future is not compatible with a region in flames and with an escalating or a worsening conflict between Israel and its neighbours. Thanks for listening to this week's In the City. We'll be back next week. But in the meantime, if you like our show, please head on over to wherever you listen to podcasts and rate, review and subscribe. It really does help people find the show. This episode was hosted by me, David Merritt, Francine Lacqua and Allegra Stratton. It was produced by Summer Sadi with additional editing by Blake Maples. And special thanks to Matthew Martin, Victoria Cochran, Gail Lamperti and Sarah Halls.